Now, it's my pleasure to present today's presenter, Bob Apollo. He's founder and chief outcomes officer at Inflexion-Point, where he works with B2B CEOs and sales leaders to accelerate revenue growth through the proven principles of outcome-centric selling. So with that, Bob, take it away.
Nick, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and whatever time those of you who might be listening to this on demand. I am Bob Apollo, and it's my pleasure to spend the next few minutes with you. I'd like to share some of the things I've learned along the way in a career in B2B selling, much of it in high-tech businesses, and during which I learned a number of things about the importance not just of selling value, but of acting with values. Now, today, after retiring from corporate life, I now work with a cross-section of clients ranging from scale-ups to large corporates, helping them to put the principles of outcome-centric selling into practice. And there'll be a little bit more about what I mean by outcome-centric selling in just a moment. But let me start by posing the question, what do we mean by value? Now, it's the sort of thing that could have a number of definitions, and I'm sure that if you go on the web and look them up, you'll find a number of alternative options. Here's one that I think is as good as any. Value is the importance or worth of something for an individual, a stakeholder group, in other words, a community within a larger organization, or the organization itself. But I think there's something a bit more than that. It is my belief, and I hope that some of the things we'll be discussing today will help reinforce it, is that value doesn't lie in the activity. It lies in the outcome, the result. And this is particularly important when we're thinking about value and our own customers. So, values. Well, one way of looking at things is, as I've said, to think of value as the importance or worth of something for individuals, groups, or organizations. And I will explore this in a little while, but before I do, I want to really focus on the alternative meaning of value and values. And those are the principles, the standards, the behaviors, the attitudes that together at the individual level, at the stakeholder group level, or at an organizational level, reflect how you go about doing your business and the principles upon which that's based. And I want to suggest to you, and certainly this has been my experience in my career, that you can't sell value effectively if you don't operate within an environment in which you have strong values. And those values need, in my experience, to come from the top. And those organizational values are about the principles, the attitudes, the behaviors of a company as a whole, the standards that it sets. And of course, then within the organization, there are a number of communities. I'll call them stakeholder groups. You might think of them as functions or departments. And it's the principles and the standards and the attitudes and behaviors that those groups apply. And I'm thinking in our context, particularly of the values of the sales organization. And then we've got individual values. Again, principles, standards, attitudes, behaviors of the individuals within the organization. Now, all three are important, but I think fundamentally, and if you want to create a sustainable culture of value, those values need to come from the top. Now, there are many elements of value. I want to highlight just a handful here that I regard as universally valuable. And I'm going to start with honesty. And I'm going to develop this point in just a little while, because I think it's one of those foundational things that if that is lacking, if honesty is lacking, it's really hard to build anything meaningful around it. Integrity, very closely associated with honesty. Outlook, a positive frame of mind. Responsibility, and of course responsibility is often partnered with accountability, and those two, responsibility and accountability together, are also a very powerful and essential foundation for a values-based culture. And then we've got the motivation individually of functions or departments and of the organization as a whole. And I want to start by focusing on honesty. And it's a topic that's become, I think, particularly visible, not only in business, but in political life. Certainly here in my native UK, we're going through a period where a very significant part of the population questions the honesty and the integrity of those who are leading us. And I want to make the point, I'm not trying to be political. Organizations and the people who work for them and who represent them need to be honest with themselves before they can be honest with others. If we as individuals, as departments or organizations get into a habit of lying to ourselves, we can't expect to recognize the value of truth to others. Now, how do we create that culture of internal honesty? Well, I believe very strongly that how we choose to treat and communicate with people internally will define how our employees treat people externally. And I think it really starts with insisting on honest conversation and communication, upwards and downwards. If something needs to be said, then say it. It also means having a culture of saying what people need to hear, not what they want to hear. It means demonstrating that absolute focus on ethics and integrity and being unwilling to tolerate any deviation from that. It means respecting both our customers and our competitors. If we ever get into the habit of bad-mouthing our competitors, if we ever get into the habit of bad-mouthing a customer that we perceive to be difficult, we'll find it very hard to avoid that spreading. I think it's also part of under-promising and over-delivering, of avoiding unjustified bluster and boosterism. Sticking with the truth. Back to particular examples in sales, it's not trying to close what is unclosable and refusing to pursue bad business. Being willing to turn away from business rather than take it, knowing that we're going to be unlikely to deliver the outcomes that our customer was looking for. Now, unfortunately, this essential thread of honesty, it can be easy to destroy and hard to restore. And to touch on the point that I made just a moment ago, we need to avoid encouraging people to just say what they think their managers want to hear rather than what they need to hear. It's a two-way street. I've observed cultures where salespeople are unwilling to convey the truth they know about the state of their opportunities to their managers for fear of the reaction. And all that does is to postpone the inevitable reckoning. When honesty breaks down, it can happen because we tolerate out and out lying, or more commonly, being economical with the truth, encouraging anyone to bend the rules for any reason just to get a result. Or, and maybe this is the mirror image, declaring rules that you don't expect to be followed. like the Northern Ireland Protocol, establishing expectations that are unrealistic, hiding behind semantics, all of these things. Apparently, some of them little things, trivial things, can have a corrosive effect on our attempts to create a culture of values. And there are some particular behaviors that can destroy trust. And I've seen them, maybe you have. Pressurizing salespeople to forecast opportunities that they know, and actually probably you know, they cannot win in the projected time frame or the predicted value, because you want to convey or communicate something to somebody else. Encouraging or failing to discourage salespeople to share negative information with a prospective customer, a failure to be honest. Setting, and I think this is becoming increasingly critical in the as a service world, in which so many of our offerings are being sold, setting unrealistic or unreasonable customer expectations, which are only going to be dashed, or tolerating or failing to confront other forms of dishonest, unethical, or undesirable behavior. You know, forgiving somebody who appears at face value to be a top performing salesman because despite that, they are being, or you suspect them to be behaving in a way that doesn't reflect the company's values. It might be convenient to ignore it, but it's completely wrong. So, and in doing this, in setting a values-based culture, it's my experience that actions are far more important than words. You see, it's not what you've written down, it's what happens in practice. Now, I had the great good fortune when I was starting my career in technology to work for Hewlett-Packard in a period where they were seen as an exemplar of Silicon Valley culture. And there's something rather interesting. There was an HP way. Those of you who've worked for HP might be familiar with it. It talked about, and by the way, I think these things are as relevant today as they ever were, trust and respect for the individual, seeking and expecting high levels of achievement and performance, conducting business with uncompromising integrity, achieving common objectives through teamwork, and encouraging flexibility and innovation. Now, these are lastingly powerful values, and they were written down in the HP way. And some other companies, envious of HP's success, tried to emulate them. And I won't name names, but they did it the wrong way round. They decided they needed a code of conduct, so they wrote it down and hoped that their people embraced it. What HP did, and what I think the most powerful cultures do, is that the code of conduct reflects the behavior that has become, you know, the appropriate way of doing business within the organization. You don't create a values-based culture by declaring some ethereal mission statement or what have you. You have to live it, and you have to expect your people to live it. Actions are far more important than words. Now, but values are about people. So what about recruiting people who show the right values? Now, there are a number of things you might think about when you're considering whether or not to hire somebody. And I'm taking these examples from Objective Management Group's approach to sales evaluation, an approach that today has evaluated more than 2.2 million salespeople and has developed some very illuminating benchmarks about the competencies that are important today. And there are a number that you would categorize as being skill set or sales competence, everything from hunting or reaching decision making or being consultative, certainly selling value, qualifying, presenting, etc. Now, these competencies are typically a combination of skills and experience, and typically these competencies are trainable. They can be supported by experience, and sometimes, but not inevitably, these competencies can be transferred from one job to another, although we'd be very unwise to assume that somebody who's been a stellar performer in a previous role will automatically do the same in our own environment. But those are the skill set related things. And perhaps even more important, from my perspective, are what I'll characterize as mindset. And these really fit into a couple of categories. The first is what Objective Management Group refer to as the will to sell, the desire to be successful, the commitment to be successful, to demonstrate excellence in our chosen profession, of having the right outlook, of being unwaveringly willing to accept responsibility and accountability for our actions, and of course being self-motivated. And then there are some other aspects of mindset and behavior. Some of these I found very interesting when I first came across them, and all of them have certainly proven in my experience to be of very high importance in predicting how well somebody will fit into an organization or perform. The first one is not needing approval. Now, it doesn't mean behaving in a way where you're seeking disapproval. It means doing what you know and believe to be right, rather than what you think your audience is hoping or expecting. Staying in the moment. Being able to project how you go about buying things into your expectations for how your prospective customers buy things, and being aware where there might be a disconnect and dealing with it. Being comfortable discussing money and being strong when faced with the rejection that is perhaps inevitable from time to time for salespeople. Not blaming others, taking responsibility to ourselves. Now, these mindsets are collectively attitudes and behaviors. And actually, I think, and maybe this is your experience as well, they tend to be more coachable skills rather than expecting what's conventionally classified as training to be able to improve them. And this is why coaching is such an important skill for today's sales managers, because attitudes and behaviors are about how each salesperson, how each sales manager thinks and acts. And they are the essential foundation on which learned skills and experiences can be applied. Candidly, no matter how good your training is, no matter how professionally it's delivered, if it isn't delivered onto a foundation of the right mindset, it will not have anything like the impact that we hoped for it. And again, these things, mindset, is more a matter of one, recruiting the right people in the first place, and two, coaching their potential. So, hiring people with the right values. Well, one of the things one of my mentors at HP taught me, and I've believed it to be true then, and I believe it to be true now. And in fact, my experience has only reinforced it. When we're recruiting, we need to prioritize attitude and behavior. In other words, the mindset of the individual over their experience. In other words, their inferred skill set. Because I think all of the evidence shows very clearly that it is very significantly easier to develop the relevant skill set in somebody with a positive mindset than it is to turn a negative mindset into a positive one. It's a matter of taking multiple perspectives when we're making our recruitment decisions. Of course, you know, CVs have value, but very often there are a litany of positive achievement. And I think we're always wise to understand the context of those claimed achievements. And honestly, some of them might be more down to luck than the competence of the individual. And we need to know that. But it's not just that. It's when we interview, making sure that the candidate is exposed to multiple people within our organization with different experiences and expectations. Things like role plays can be very illuminating when it comes to understanding how, for example, people are likely to behave under pressure. References. Well, yes, but if people are offering references, they're almost certainly going to be positive ones. And again, I think the dialogue with potential referees needs to try and get underneath the surface and understand the mindset of the individual and not their skill set. And again, and I'm a great fan of these competency evaluations that benchmark the sales DNA, the will to sell, the key sales competencies against a set of standards which have been shown to be effective in various peer groups. And let me just leave you with a thought here. It's not just, can this individual sell? In fact, maybe the more important question is, will they sell? Will they sell in a way that reflects your values in your typical customer situations and benchmarked against the peer group against which they may be competing? Now, I think there's very strong value in evaluating, and there's a couple of statistics that I think bear this out. 92% of candidates who were hired after being recommended by, this one turns out to be Objective Management Group's assessment tool. You may have others. I found Objective Management Groups to be particularly effective. 92% of those candidates who are hired after recommendation rose to the top half of their new sales force within 12 months. Compare that. 75% of the candidates who were hired despite not being recommended by a science-based evaluation, who maybe we made recruitment decisions emotionally, or maybe we felt under pressure, we had to hire somebody. 3/4 of the candidates who emerge with a negative recommendation from these sort of evaluations actually end up failing predictably in their new role within 6 months. Now, if any of you think about the total cost and impact of making bad sales hires, I think this is a tremendous argument for investing in doing it right. Now, let's say we have hired people with potential, people who seem to reflect the values we're trying to inculcate throughout our organization. Well, then we still have a responsibility to convert that potential into performance. So yes, part of it is training on our offerings. And that's classically what a new sales hire will receive in almost any sales organization. But it's not enough. We need to induct them in our values, our company values, and we need to establish their expectations, not by giving them a values statement, but by establishing expectations through our own behavior with them. I will always choose to believe our behavior over and above anything that takes the form of a document. We need to enable them to identify and target their most valuable opportunities. And typically, if we're in a B2B environment, then that's a matter of understanding key issues, ideal customers, key roles, and the trigger events that we need to look out for as salespeople in identifying promising current opportunities. We need to help them develop their confidence through role plays. I'm not sure that some organizations invest anything like enough time in this. I think it's a really valuable exercise. And absolutely, we need to invest in intensive, frequent coaching and feedback. Now, it may or may not surprise you to know that today's top performing organizations are investing more of their management time in coaching than the ineffective organizations. In fact, the top performing organizations are investing as much as 1/3 of the manager's time because they recognize how important it is to transfer not just skills, but attitudes and behaviors and mindset. And that converting potential into performance is also about focusing on outcomes and not just activities, not giving salespeople a heavy quantity-focused set of targets, but right from the start, getting the salesperson to focus on the quality of the outcome that their activities are generating. The activity is only a means to an end. And I'd also suggest to you that it can be tremendously powerful to make sure you capture what they're learning. And this is another thing that perhaps doesn't get as much visibility as I believe it should, it deserves to. And that's not just exposing salespeople to the appropriate training courses, however they're delivered, classroom, on demand, online, or what have you, not just coaching them and investing enough time, enough quality management time in coaching. But there's also lateral or corrective learning, creating an environment where salespeople can share their learning with each other. We've already talked about role plays. Another very powerful element of collective learning is creating a pool of value-related stories and anecdotes that the salespeople can tell in the appropriate circumstances to reflect the appropriate message and deliver it reflecting the appropriate values. Collectively, as a group, identifying the common obstacles to progress and how to navigate around them. Something which can only happen if you've created a culture of self-honesty is to encourage the salespeople to acknowledge for themselves and to share with others things that they look back on and wish they'd done, or things that they did and regretted. Because it's not just the individual that needs to learn from this, we can all learn from it. And anything that they've learned that they wish somebody else had prepared them better for previously. If you create a culture of collective learning based on your values and based on the pooled experiences of your salespeople, everybody's ability to deliver value will be materially increased. Now, I've made reference to outcomes at an earlier stage of our conversation. And I want to spend a little bit more time. I want to share a few words with you, a few thoughts about what I see as the increasing importance of outcomes. Now, there are different understandings of value. Go back, and this is not quite repeating the definition I shared with you earlier, but I try to illustrate what I sometimes see in the average salesperson or sales organization. And they might typically think that value is about the projected value of the vendor's so-called solution. It's probably based, if you're in a disciplined environment, on predicted return on investment, payback period, and so on. And it can be done really well, but if it's not done well, or if it's not done at all, there's a danger that it will be forgotten, abandoned, or ignored once the sale's been closed. And I don't think, in fact, I'm very confident, this is not the way customers think about value. It's much more about the actual value the customer derives after implementing the solution. In other words, the outcome. And it's based on real world efficiency, effectiveness, financial metrics. And it's critical in a world where we're increasingly selling things on an as a service, on a renewable contract basis. That perception of value based on business outcomes is critical to their decision to continue to use, to renew, and to expand your so-called solution. And that's where the CARE Flywheel comes in. And it may or may not be a concept that you're familiar with. I'll introduce it to you briefly. It certainly merits probably a complete discussion of its own. And it's about creating meaningful value through each phase of the sales cycle and the buying journey. And during the first phase, I prefer to call it commit rather than close, because we're seeking to get the customer's commitment to move forward with us, is about understanding and shaping outcomes, not just trying to understand what they think they need functionally, understanding what business outcomes they're looking for. It's about facilitating the buying journey. It's about removing the obstacles from that buying journey, which are often very significant. And of course, it's about getting their confidence and securing their commitment to proceed. And then we move to the second segment of the flywheel, adopt. And that's really about delivering on the promises that we made and that the customer believed when we got them to commit to us in the first place, implementing it. Ensuring user adoption, yes, but I'd say that the role of customer success is much, much more than ensuring user adoption. It's actually, I believe, about ensuring that the customer achieves and recognizes that they've achieved their desired business outcomes. So that's a key point in the flywheel. Now, we'd be very wrong, I think, to abandon the flywheel at this point, assuming we've got to it. Because again, in an economy where across a broad range of deliverables, our customers are increasingly preferring to consume them as a service, then we need to make sure that they renew. And we need to do that, yes, by maximizing user adoption, but certainly by making sure at every level within our customer that the value that they've achieved has been fully recognized. And that's how we get a commitment to renew. And that's also how we build the platform for expansion. Because if we've secured their confidence, if we've helped them to adopt, if we've ensured that they've achieved the business outcomes, if they've given us their confidence to renew with us, then we can seek out opportunities to expand, to widen the usage, to seek new projects, to secure their commitment to expand, and then initiate another buying journey. Now this, I think, this cycle more faithfully represents the true nature of a sales organization's interaction with its customers than a classic 5-step qualify to close conventional sales process. Now, why do salespeople need to care? Well, I think in part it's because we all need to recognize that customer satisfaction and profitability is actually directly linked to the ability to create incremental value. So if we focus on commit and adopt only, our goal is to win the order. It doesn't guarantee successful adoption. And in any renewal-based environment, if we focus on commit and adopt only, that approach is never likely to be profitable in any as-a-service environment. When we broaden our focus to the next element of the care cycle, and we do a professional job of it, we focus on commit, adopt, and renew. Our goal is to ensure that the customer is motivated to renew. It reinforces the importance of demonstrating that they've achieved the desired outcomes. That approach is typically profitable then from the 18 to 24-month mark. Most of the studies that I've seen suggest that as a service businesses, that's about the break-even point. You may be lucky enough to be in a business which is better than that, but that's the average. And that's partly down to the cost of the initial sale. So you really need to make sure you can't just focus on order taking. You've got to focus on commit, adopt, and renew if you'd have any chance of being profitable. But then, if you focus on the full care cycle, all of those elements, including proactively finding expansion opportunities, your goal is to maximize lifetime customer value to them and to you. And of course, that means we need to find new ways of creating new incremental valuable outcomes. And that approach, again, according to all of the studies, is one that results in progressively increasing profitability over the customer life cycle. So if you're in any industry, in any business where renewal is important today or will become important in your future, you, I would suggest, need to think in these terms. You need to invest in making sure that all four segments of the care cycle, the CARE Flywheel, are properly invested in. So let me try and draw some conclusions. You'll always sell value more effectively if your organization is aligned around the right values. Values come from the top. Organizational values influence stakeholder group values, i.e. departments or functions, which in turn influence individual values. You can't be honest with your customer if you've got a habit of not being honest with yourselves. We need to hire for attitude and behavior over experience. And we need to invest in inducting our salespeople into our culture and to reinforce that through intensive coaching. I've highlighted what I believe to be the power and impact of collective learning, and focusing our salespeople on outcomes, on the quality of what happens as a consequence of their work, rather than on raw activities, and managing that whole care cycle: commit, adopt, renew, and expand. So those are a few thoughts that I hope you'll find relevant to what you're seeking to achieve in your organization, and I hope some of the ideas have resonated with you. If you'd like to learn more about any of these ideas, I'd welcome it if you could drop me a line to bob@inflexion-point.com, or you can visit the website, www.inflexion-point.com. So there we have it. And I think it's time now to hand back to Nick.
Thank you, Bob, and appreciate the insightful presentation. And in addition to reaching out to Bob via the Inflection Point website or his email address, you can also leave a note in the exit survey, and we'll pass that that you'd like to hear more from him through right along to Bob. Now, there's still time to enter questions for the Q&A session. So to give everyone a little bit of time to do so, just a few quick words on LeveragePoint. What is LeveragePoint? For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we offer a SaaS solution that creates interactive digital value propositions that help sales team tell these value stories in a more powerful, customer-specific way. How does it work? Well, first, product marketing and pricing team members can construct these custom branded value models and messages to create a value proposition that helps sales tell a story. They can then publish that into a cloud-based library that's accessible by every rep at your organization to customize in real time for each individual customer's and prospect's needs. Finally, starting with the first sales call, teams can modify the customer's baseline data in real time in order to create a unique business case to buy that the prospect can leverage internally to drive the deal forward. And these value propositions can be used from the beginning to the end of the sales process and into post-sale as well. So early on, they're really useful as flexible case studies in call prep and in building sales confidence, qualifying opportunities, and in engaging customer executives. As you move to the middle of the sales process, LeveragePoint value stories provide custom value analyses as an important consultative selling tool that really address pre-sales challenges. When you get to the purchase stage, the value proposition then becomes a shared business case, which is collaboratively agreed between sales and customer sponsors, and ends up serving as a buyer's internal financial justification to purchase, which becomes a real asset for sales teams when it comes to pricing negotiations. So using LeveragePoint, who wins? Well, everyone really. On average, our customers achieve 5 to 15% higher close rates and 5 to 25% higher prices when using LeveragePoint's value propositions. These can be presented live, then downloaded into PowerPoint, and then uploaded into Salesforce. And so if it really fits neatly into any sales and marketing stack. So if you found any of that compelling and would like to learn more about what LeveragePoint does, feel free to drop us a note in the exit survey, and we can set you up with a custom demo featuring something that's specific to your industry. So now it is time for the questions and answers. So I'm going to get my camera back on and dig through some of the questions. So Bob, you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll.
Alrighty. So is there an overlap between the values that make for great salespeople and ones that make for great sales leaders?
Absolutely. And in fact, I mean, there's probably a superset of the values that we look for and expect from sales leaders, but many: honesty, integrity, the willing to speak truth to power, all of those things are highly relevant, necessary, and valuable for salespeople, for frontline sales managers, and actually all the way up through the sales leadership stack. And if we're expecting our salespeople to behave in a value-centric way according to our culture, then it's very important that everybody that they look up to conveys the same signals and behaves in the same way.
Makes sense. Let me see what we have for our next one. So KPIs, a couple questions on KPIs. So in terms of kind of the best value-centric teams that you've worked with, are there certain KPIs that matter more than some others? And I think a related question is, are there some KPIs that, tend to be overused and don't really align with, outcome-centric sales teams?
Yeah, so firstly, let me sort of make a statement. I'm not saying in any way that activity levels aren't important, but I think an obsession with activity levels, in other words, quantity over quality, has a really negative impact on trying to create a value and a values-centric culture. Just as it's important that we understand the business outcomes that our customers are seeking to achieve, our own internal metrics are much more valuable when they reflect outcomes. And an outcome might be not that I completed a call, but that the customer committed to do something, an advance that reflects progress in both their buying journey and in my sales cycle. So actually we can look at outcomes as a very important internal KPI or metric, because outcomes inherently reflect the quality of what we've done and not just the quantity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense, and points to the need for a good revenue operations team to kind of make that a reality. So in terms of the CARE cycle, a couple questions on that one. So what levers do organizations have at their disposal to, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, get salespeople on board with it?
Well, and you need to look carefully about this. If some measure of compensation, for example, or performance measurement is down to the customer's clear acceptance and usage of the solution, and not just down to the customer the salesperson taking an order for it, that can be very helpful. Part of compensation or measurements being customer satisfaction, not just customer usage. So you want to set the expectations correctly before you take an order. Now, would that always result in some amendment to compensation? Maybe not, but it ought to trigger a proper coaching discussion with salespeople who appear not to be setting the right expectations with their customers, because that's only going to harm the organization that they work for. So again, integrating customer success into the sales cycle, making sure that, because the salesperson's understood what business outcomes the customer's looking for. That information is relayed to customer success if and when the customer is handed over, so the customer isn't forced to go through the rigmarole again as if they'd never talked about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a trend we're seeing a lot too. The evolution of customer success from the kind of the SaaS software space into other industries. So
yeah, it's evolving in a couple of dimensions. One, in any industry where renewal or expansion are important, customer success is important. And I think in the early days, customer success was probably more focused on ensuring usage and adoption, and reacting to issues in a timely fashion. But I think there's a bigger view of customer success now, and that includes making sure the customer success team is having discussions about business outcomes and delivered value, and building a positive mindset in the customer where way before renewal comes up as a question, the customer has already recognized the value of what they've been achieving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we see that a lot with some of our customers as well, you know, using similar LeveragePoint value propositions in the sales process and then carrying that over into the post-sale environment. So that's definitely a trend, you know, to keep an eye on. I think we have, I've got a few questions I'll probably group together for our last one. So some industry specific questions. So a good way to probably summarize them would be, are there any sort of organizational practices, for lack of a better way of saying it, that you see in specific to certain industries that result in suboptimal value realization?
Well, by the way, yeah, I think there are patterns, but I don't think they're inevitable. So for example, if industries see themselves as operating in a very transactional mode, you know, competing on the basis of price and delivery or specification, then they often have less sophisticated approaches to understanding what the customer's outcomes are. So, you know, industries where, let's say, a very significant amount of their business is repeat business, but not based on renewal, about reconsumption every time. But I tell you what, even if in those industries, if you can lay a foundation of perceived differentiated value, then your chances of continuing to grow with the customer, of earning profit and so on. I think these concepts, I draw a little matrix. And on one side of the matrix, I'd think about, so is the customer on a familiar or an unfamiliar buying journey? You know, if they think it's a very familiar journey, they've got processes for buying. If it's unfamiliar, they need to be educated, and they probably recognize that. And then on the other dimension is this a inevitable or a discretionary purchase? And when you've got the convergence of an unfamiliar buying journey plus a discretionary purchase, then a focus on value and on outcomes and on not just answering why choose us, but answering why change, why act now, how do we get this project approved internally versus all of the other competing projects. Well, at that intersection, the sort of approaches I've been describing become particularly relevant, essential.
Yeah, and I think that why change and generating urgency is, you know, another good reason, you know, for all businesses to, you know, think about the outcomes that they provide to their customers. So that's I just want to thank you for a great presentation, Bob. And then moving on to next month's webinar, as always, make sure you pre-register in the exit survey. We have another great session scheduled. We're going to be talking to Mark Stiving. He's going to be talking about how value conversations can impact the sales process from the very top of the funnel at the beginning of the customer journey all the way down to close and beyond. So the impact of value conversations is something that I think will be really relevant to the marketing and sales folks in the audience. So make sure you pre-register in the exit survey. And that's going to be it for us today. So I want to thank
everyone for taking the time to join us. Big thanks to Bob for sharing his insights as always. And from those of us here at LeveragePoint and Inflexion-Point, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.